Well, good evening. We are on, and I believe we are going to be successful in capturing this tonight. I apologize. I was about a minute or two late. I was having some difficulties, but I'm fairly certain we're going to be okay tonight. So we're going to tonight discuss chapters 8 and 9. Chapter 8, teamwork and team performance, and then move into chapter 9, decision making and creativity. So in chapter 8, we want to blow this slide up just a little bit. That's a little too high. Come back down here a little bit. All right, now let's see if we can get this up here. Now we're going to try to answer these questions as we go through the session this evening here on chapter 8. How can we create high performance teams? How can team processes be improved? How can team communications be improved? And then finally, how can team decisions be improved? Now, that will kind of lead us into chapter 9. So we kind of need to keep that in our context. All right. So let's move on here. Characteristics of high performance teams. This slide shows it pretty well, and I don't think we really need to actually do a lot of talking about this. What I would like to say is we have to be motivated to set teams. We have to have results. In other words, we're going to have goals and objectives. They have to be measurable so we know that we're going to achieve something. We've been satisfactory in being able to do that. And then finally, team members have to have complementary skills to move this process forward. Now you can see the last bullet talks about the right mix. That's fine, but we have to be able to complement each other. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to do the things that we want to do. Team building is something that is very important because we have to make sure that everyone understands the team is not only better than any one individual person, but is also, as we've talked about, the synergy is greater than the sum of its parts. So we need to think about doing these things and getting through these. We have to focus on team. You know, the old saw, there's no I in team, and that's very true, and I can't improve upon that statement. None of us can. But we have to be able to make teams work, and if we don't do the things that are required, we're just going to have a bunch of I's working together, and we're going to call it a team, when in fact it's not going to be exactly what it is that we want. Now, there are some team building exercises, and we're going to get to that in slide 6, and so I'll talk about that. And obviously, we want to be able to all the time, pardon me, all the time we're doing this with the team, this team building exercise, the goal is improvement on task and relationship processes to make us be able to move forward. Now, you can see this slide. I'm going to try to get it here so we can get it all together. This is figure 8.1 in your text. And notice the first crack out of the box. We have to be able to identify what it is, pardon me, we're working on, and not be sidetracked with what I like to call symptoms. You know, I've used this analogy before. I don't think I've used it yet in this session. But if you're a car dealer, in a car dealership, and your general manager comes to you and says that sales are down, and then you convene a meeting with all your key staff people, And somebody tells you, well, we're in a poor location. Somebody says we don't have a good product. Somebody says our service isn't too good. Our salespeople aren't too good. We don't do a very good job with follow-up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All right. We know what the problem is. We've already identified the problem. The problem is, or we already know what our problem is. Our sales are down. But what is the reason our sales are down? So that's problem A. Our sales are down. But problem B is, and more important, why are the sales down? That's the issue we have to attack to make sure that we get the sales to go back up the way we need them to do. We've got to get all the information that we need for this thing, and then we have to analyze it properly. And then down here it says planning for team improvement. Obviously, this is what you want to do. You've got this. You decide how you're going to do this. We're going to talk about this in a second when we get to these team building approaches. We select what it is that we need to do to help us move forward and improve our task ability, our processes, our maintenance, which we're going to come to in a few minutes. Maintenance meaning keeping relationships working. And then finally, we're going to reach our end state, whatever that end state happens to be. And then we're going to pull back and we're going to evaluate what we've done at what we have done, and then maybe get some feedback in there, find out what it is we did right, what it is we didn't do as well as we could have. And then this all goes back into helping to improve the processes. And notice in the middle, participation by everybody. Everybody on the team must be active in this scenario. Excuse me, I skipped a slide here. These are the methods, and we talked a little bit about this before, I believe last week, in ways to help create high-performance teams to move our thing to pros. And there's three ways that you can do this. One is by a formal retreat. That is, you get everybody together, you get off-site, get away from the work site, workstation. Some places, some organizations will have formal rooms within the organization, or maybe a building outside is still on the company grounds where you can meet and discuss this. So you're not at the office, you don't have those pressures on you, and then you're able to work through them without the constant bother of being in the office. Outdoor experience approach, I've talked about this before. This is where you would get a person who is trained in leading teams through these outdoor experiences. The object is that the experiences you're going to go through are challenging, like something like crossing a rope bridge or things of that nature, where each member of the team has to help another member go across. And of course, this promotes cohesion, it promotes unity, it promotes what I want to say here, the dependency upon each other, etc. My caution is to make sure if you're going to do this, that the person that is going to lead this, who's somebody from outside your organization, is trained in this. And if someone says, I can't do that, that stops. Nobody should ever be forced to do something in which they're uncomfortable with. And then continuous improvement is exactly what it says. Everybody gets together. We work on things, whatever we have to do. How do we improve our tasks? How do we improve our relationships? How do we go forward with this thing? Notice it says that everybody takes responsibility for this, and it's an ongoing thing. Now, a good way to do this is to appoint someone to be the leader each different time that you go through the process, so that everybody gets the opportunity to lead the team through the discussion or facilitate the discussion. That probably is a better way of saying that. Now, one of the things we have to be concerned with, and you can see this in the text on page 174, jumping 10 pages ahead. These are things that new members worry about. And we think here about how do I fit in? What's my role? Do I have the skills? Uh, what are the processes? What type of relationships are going to be formed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so when we find this, we find that we will come up with several different types of people who come to this new team operation, and they fall into several different categories. I mentioned here tough battler, friendly helper, and then the objective thinker. And you, by the way, you can see this. This is not a figure on page 174, but it's sort of a graphic. The tough battler wants to fit in, and to do so, to experience skill. So he or she may want to not take charge, but they want to make sure everybody knows they're there. And so there may be a go-getter, and they really want to get in there and do things, and they will be viewed as being very aggressive. And so sometimes you have to get them, you have to pull them back and keep them, keep that aggression, if you will, focused on task and not on members, etc. Then we have a person here called a friendly helper. He or she is uncertain, and he or she needs to be liked. So there's some maintenance thing that's required, some relationship building things that's required here. And in doing this, this need likeness is something, they will go out of their way to try to help, and in certain ways that may not be necessarily what you want. So you have to be careful about them. And then finally, we have the objective thinker. This is the guy or gal who sits back, puts on his or her thinking cap, and says, "Well, how can we think through this product? How can we get clarity here? How can we know where we're going? What is it we need to do, et cetera, et cetera." So we've seen all these people. We have to be careful about them. We have to stop and make sure that we address their needs. But above all, we need to make sure that these people are welcomed into the group. And failure to do that is going to cause lots and lots of problems, most of which we don't really want to have to address. Now, these next three items that we're going to talk about here, distributed leadership, task activities, and maintenance activities. And what distributed leadership just simply means is assigning responsibility for various parts of the tasks that have to be done. So now we're going to talk a focus here. And remember, I've tried to say this and try to get this to sink in with you, that we have two things at hand at all times within a team. And that is obviously focused on task, but the other is forming relationships. Now that's kind of maintenance in a way, because you have to keep the team well-oiled and make sure they're working the way they're supposed to be working. And so we come into the next slide, and that is figure 8.2 at the top of page 175. On the left-hand side, we see leading by task contributions. On the right-hand side, we see leading by maintenance contributions. Now, notice that there are some things here, there are some similarities here in a way. Counts a little bit differently, and we have to think about that. So notice that there are a couple of keys here, in at least to me, in the task contributions, is clarifying what's been offered. That's restating. I think I heard you to say, now that's also a thing in communications, which we'll get to when we get to chapter 11, but it's something we need to think about while we're here. So you want to clarify things that have been offered. And then last, the one that I like here is summing up what's been said. So going back and saying, okay, here's what we've come up with, and lay that out on the table, as it were. And in this fashion, then you can get, people will come back and say, well, no, I didn't really say that. This is what I said, or this is what I meant, etc. So in summarizing discussion, you're not cutting discussion off. You're just saying, okay, here we are. This is the point we came to. This is the point we stopped, and then just back off and let people come back to you again. Now, in maintenance contributions, again, I like to use this as relationship as much as maintenance. There are two very, very important things here. Not to say that other ones aren't. First is inviting participation. Now, we talked a little bit about social loafing last week, and you worked a case study about social loafing. Most of the social loafing that the case talked about was in a group. I say that in a group because it occurred in a classroom. And even though they were set apart, they weren't set up with a team, whereas everybody had a task. That doesn't happen as often in groups as it does in teams. Now, perhaps it should have been done that way, but it was not. The professor didn't set it up that way. So we were working with a group and not a team. But anyway, the first is inviting participation. You want to make sure when you have a team that everybody participates. You can't have a team where some person sits off to the side and does not participate. That does not work. It will not work, and it will cause problems. Maybe not on task, but it will cause relationship problems. It will keep this team from being well-oiled. And then the other, is, at least as far as I'm concerned, which really goes in with this inviting participation, is this encouragement. Get people to participate. A simple thing is somebody could say something, say, hey, well, Joe or Sally, how do you feel about that? What's your take on it? Is this something we need to do? Should we move forward with this? We need to take a step back. Where do we go? So these are very, very important things. There are other ones that are just as important, and I'm not trying to skip any of them. I'm just telling you what's important to me. And I'm not going to go over each of these because you can read them. They're fairly clear. They're fairly easy to understand. Look at these and put yourself in a category when you worked in a team or even when you worked in a group. And I think you will see the value of each one of these without spending a lot of time discussing each particular one. Well, these are problems that we really have. And groups and teams do have these problems, and we have to be careful about them. The first one is just taking charge and not letting anybody else enter the conversation. It's referred to as bullying. And you know, it's kind of these things. It's continuous. It's a browbeating exercise. It's my way or the highway, and I'm not going to let you do that. Withdrawal is something that is we have to be careful about, and that's just that you're in a team and you're not going to participate. You're not going to do anything, and you're just going to sit off to your side. Now, I like to use an example of what I did when I was in graduate school. There were two exercises, and I think that I played in. And the one I think is a better telling exercise than the first one is. And this is we had to get together, and the professor had us sit in a circle and hold hands and things. And then we were supposed to exchange chips, like a poker chip. And the poker chips had varying values depending upon the color. And so the object was to try to help people to move up in the hierarchy through cooperation. I don't remember that everything. I think we had to trade chips and so on and so forth. Well, after we were approximately 40, now this really wasn't a team, but to give you this idea of his withdrawal, after about 40% way through the exercise, I realized I wasn't going to be able to move up. I was dead in the water. And so I stopped. I said there was no sense in me. I didn't announce it. Yes, I just said there's no sense in me participating because I'm not going to go I'm not going to go anywhere. So that's what we're talking about. And this is something that a team simply cannot afford. Everybody has to be moving together. And this is where you're really talking about this maintenance problem, this relationship issues. Keep them going. Stay on task, stay on message. Don't get off message. Keep going, and then make sure you don't have people there that are needy. That that doesn't work. Now this particular slide is pretty easy to understand, I think. And we're talking here about roles. That's within the team, what we're supposed to do. And this task that we're supposed to carry out and how it relates with other people, etc. Now, what happens next, what could happen next, is what is known as role ambiguity, when the team member isn't certain about what he or she is supposed to do. And that's just not something that you can afford to have on a team if you want it to be well functioning and be focused on task completion. And then, of course, in the roles we have two kinds here. We either have role overload or role underload, and I don't know that one is any worse than the other. Although I would think. Okay, I have to answer this. You should not have that problem. No. Ah. Ms. Jacobs, if you're on the line, I can only apologize to you. You should not have that problem. Everybody is unmuted. You should be able to get in. You could try dialing. I can only apologize. I'll have to talk to our technical people. I did talk to them before when another student had mentioned that she was unable to get the audio. My understanding is you shouldn't have to do that. I use this system from my home to come into these type meetings and never use the telephone whatsoever. So anyway, as I mentioned, I'm getting in here to role conflict, but I don't know that either one of those is worse than the other, although I would say role underload is, because then people are sitting around with their arms full of not knowing what to do. Role conflict, this is simply we don't know what to do and how to do it. And this is also when our expectations are one thing and we don't know how we're going to meet them with whatever the role is. This is a real confusion. And then we have several different things here that we have to look for. Is the conflicts come from intra-centered, they come from inter-centered, and then person role, inter-role. So these are all things that we have to look at. Now, let's look at these just a little bit. An intra-center, that's a mixed message. That words, I think the textbook says, this is what you're supposed to do, but I want you to do something else right now. Well, I mean, you either have to do one or the other, can't do both. Inter-center, same as above, but a slightly different. And then person, the person role problem tends to be an ethical issue. And then finally, the inter-role is this is work. You're supposed to do something at work, and yet that conflicts with something that you want to do personally. Role negotiation. Obviously, that's getting together and figuring out what it is you're supposed to do, and coming together and meeting and clearing away the cobwebs, etc., so everybody understands what's supposed to go on, and then everybody goes through this negotiation. By the way, we're going to talk about negotiation in chapter 10. That should be next week, and then comes to agreement and moves forward. Norms. These are things that are expected. You can look at these as roles. You can look at them as standards. You can look at them, this is the way we do things. And high performance teams have a number of roles. And we can look at a number of norms, and we can look at these norms that are enumerated on page 177. So what we're doing here is we're clarifying standards. We are making sure that everybody knows what they are and what their expectations are, and then we're helping guide members through that process. Now, again, as I mentioned on page 177, these are the norms that teams have. Notice it says they can have positive or negative implications, but I think if you're focusing on the way you want to focus, they're going to go on and they're going to be on the positive side. So I think there's a number of keys here, but one of them is, to me, support and helpfulness. Teams continually need this. This goes back to our maintenance activities. And then ethics norms, we can't have anything other than ethically high conduct. So we're talking about standards of conduct. High achievement means we want to be the best. And then improvement simply means what can we do to get better at what we're doing. Now, leaders influence norms, and there's nothing on this slide that is not pretty much self-evident. You cannot ask a team member to do something if your behavior says, I'm going to do something different. So you've got to be a role model, as this said. Make sure that everybody understands what the goals are and what the norms are. Those are expectations. Make sure that you have people on your team that you can count on. That's assuming that you have the ability to select the team members. But if you don't, you may have, or you may ask for the ability to kick people off the team. That's a strong word, but remove them from the team. And then finally, and this is something we talked about in chapter 4, make sure that you reward the type of performance you want in some fashion to promote reinforcement. Now, promote it by ethical means, not by unethical means. Cohesiveness. Well, let's just look at this as glue. This is, and by the way, you notice here are several slides keep referring to group, and whenever you see that, please keep team in your mind. It's what keeps us together, not only keeps us together, but keeps us moving forward. And so we look for that. It's what binds us. And remember here is this, notice this next thing, that there's a strong relationship. Now let's use that, let's change that term and say there is a positive relationship between cohesiveness and conformity and performance. Now this particular slide, it's this figure which you can find at the bottom of page 179, shows us team cohesiveness on the left side, and then that's, as I remember, the x-axis, excuse me, and the y-axis is group performance norms. Like again, you see this, they put group in here when they should have put team in here. And I'm not going to go through this, but you can see here that when you have high cohesiveness and you have positive team norms, you're going to be at the best possible place you can be, high performance. But when you have low cohesiveness, probably not any, really is a better way to say that, and you have negative team performance norms, you're going to be down here in the low category. But also look at what the reverse is. You have high team performance. Excuse me. Yeah, you have high team cohesiveness, but you have low group team performance norms. You're going to get low performance. So that's what you have to look at. You want to get this up here in the right-hand corner, high, so where you're high positive, so where you're going to do the things that you want to do. Now let's look at this next figure. This is figure 8.4, which is on the next page. And it talks about how to either increase or decrease team cohesion. So let's just look at a couple of these things. One, for decrease, you want to get more people involved. Well, that's probably the wrong approach. Once you get past, I like to say 10, it becomes an unmanageable number. Some people will say you want a smaller team than even 10. Whatever works. I think you have to figure that out. But let's look at what is going to make a team work. Although there's one we may say we really don't want to do that. And that is reward team results. Make sure that when the team does the things they're supposed to do, they're rewarded for doing that in some fashion. But the one I would stay away from is increasing team homogeneity. Yes, that will probably increase team cohesion. But I don't know that that's what we want to do at the risk of getting the right results that we want. Remember, we talked about if you have a homogeneous team, they're going to do the task that you want quickly, but it may not be the right answer because most everybody has a similar background and may have similar skills, et cetera, et cetera. So you want something else to do to make them. And then, keep the team together. Talks about isolating a team from other teams. I'm not so sure that I agree with that. Although what that's talking about there, at least to me, is making sure that the isolation is that you're focused on task as opposed to focus on camaraderie with other people, etc. Inter-team dynamics, that's just relationships between teams, and you may want to talk with other teams to find out what's working for them. Then it's also not only cooperation, but it's also competition, as it says here. So you can use them as a springboard to doing bigger and better things. Now, these are ways to improve inter-team dynamics. And remember that these are things you want to continue doing. Refocusing a reward system, negotiating directly. This is inter-team, not intra. Intra being within. So make sure that you're focusing here. This is common enemy or goal. Let's take that enemy away. Let's use a goal. Sometimes, and the reason I say that, if we focus on enemy, that may take us away from positive thinking and focus in the negative area, which causes us a lot of problems. So let's think about focusing on goal completion. That's the positive. That's not the negative of somebody is the enemy. Now, what I would like for you to do is to look at the next figure, which is figure 8.5 in your text. And I'm going to move beyond this slide and talk to the next, and talking about to assure a high performance team, the type of communication we want to do, which follows what we're doing here. So you have three types of communication. Again, please refer to figure 8.5 with centralized, decentralized, and restrictive. So if we move on from these three, a decentralized communication network is where I don't know what happened. I just lost not only the picture, but my slide as well. Here we go. I apologize. Here's this decentralized, exactly what it says. Each team member is working independently, and each person shares information with each other within the team as it's needed. So a very, very decentralized way of doing. That is what is known as a co-acting team. High interdependency, as you can see on in the figure, and this outfit is best at complex tasks. The centralized communication network is exactly what it says here. You think of the team leader as being a hub, and the team members, individual team members, as being spokes. And so in this case, all the information would be funneled to the team leader, or the team leader could collect it him or herself. The individual members in the team are still working independently, as in our previous example, the decentralized, but everything that's done, this talks about results or findings, whatever they happen to be, is funneled to the team leader, and then they're put together in a finished product. So this is the second pattern, as you see here. This works best at simple tasks. And then finally, we have the restricted communication. In this example, here, this is the problem. And you can see that right away. There's disagreements. It's restricted communication tells you there's some kind of barrier. Something's not getting across. People aren't talking to each other, or they may be talking at each other, not listening to each other. Communication is very poor, and we're not going to get much, if anything, done. Proximatics, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. This is just talking about how people design office space and to make things efficient and effective for getting the job done. There's a fair amount of information about this. This is wise use of space, etc. But again, as I said, I really don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it. While it is important, we don't think of it as much at teams, but we do need to make sure that when we have teams, that each individual has enough space for him or her to do the work that they're required to do. Virtual communication networks. Again, that's something I want to spend a lot of time on. We know what that is. Those are people that meet together in a type of medium that we're using now. This type of medium doesn't have to be exact, but something like this: telecommunications, telecommuting, not telecommuting, telecommunications, video teleconferencing. That's what I wanted to say. And they meet in this fashion so they can get things done. And there's an amount of empowerment, etc. Of course, there are downsides to this because you're not meeting face to face, so you're missing verbal and nonverbal cues and clues that are very important, so we can key in on those things. And probably, I think the way to say it is to take the pulse of the other individual, figuratively, not literally. This question is just posed to you. I don't have any answers for it, but those of you who are more technologically advanced than I am may have. What innovations in electronic communication do you predict in your working lifetime? I can tell you that I did not envision anything like this back in the 1980s, and probably didn't even envision much of this, that what we're doing now, the way we're doing now. When I was in the military, as I've mentioned before, we did have video teleconferences, and I participated in those on a fairly routine basis. But at the time I was there, even though we had some things, I didn't know how far the technology was going. I'll give you one piece that I do remember when I was at the United States Army Training and Doctrine Command. Those were the people that were supposed to be thinkers ahead of time for various type things in the military. Obviously, some types of being able to deliver ammunition and armament and things of that nature. But they all had some other things. And the commanding general brought back or found a system that was available in Singapore, I think it was. It was either Singapore or Malaysia, I can't remember which. In which everyone in their home had a television set, and they had a little screen, just like the screen that you can see my image on here. And somebody could be looking at you. The general said he took one look at that, and it bothered him so much he had to get out. But we had that technology at the Army Training and Doctrine Command. We could conduct video teleconferences. There was a little image down here at the bottom, and that person could be watching what you were doing. Don't quite have that here in what we're using, but that's a possibility. I think that there's a lot we don't know and a lot to come. I do find it interesting that now we have a wristwatch that's available. I don't know whether it's Samsung that's making or not, that allows you to do communications, etc. And if any of you are fans of comic strips, Dick Tracy had that piece of technology in the 1960s. I don't know where he went with it, but it was there. Originally, he had started off with a two-way wrist radio, and then it eventually evolved to a two-way wrist TV. So they were able to do some other type things as well. Now, we've talked about this before. Excuse me, I think I went one too far. Let me double check here. No, I'm right now. I went too far. We talked a little bit about this last week, and this is how teams make decisions. The first one there is by lack of response, and people don't always get that. I was in the Army one time, and the commander that I was working with asked me to do something, and give him a decision about something, about a personnel matter. And I told him that I wasn't going to do anything, and I hoped that he understood that that was the decision. And he did. He said, yeah, I understand exactly what you're saying, and I didn't have to go any further. So we just don't say anything, and decision happens. Authority rule, we know what that is. A guy or gal in charge that makes a decision, step down, next case. Minority rule, we've talked about this before. So a couple people get together and they ram their philosophy, if you will, their thought process through the rest of the people. It's railroading at its best, where the minority rules over the majority. Majority rule, we know what that is. That's usually that a vote's taken. And then we have decision by consensus. That's where everybody may not agree at the basic thing, but they can agree on enough little parts of it that they'll eventually agree on the decision. What I tell you is, if you want to get somebody to help you with consensus, do that. Consensus is not everybody agreeing to the whole package. It's a little difficult to get through consensus, and you should have somebody who is well-versed in doing that to lead you through the process. And then decision by unanimity. Unanimity, that's exactly what it says. Everybody agrees. Now, here's some advantages and disadvantages of decision of consensus and unanimity. The advantages of, especially in consensus, not so much unanimity, but especially in consensus, is that we get a broader understanding of what's being discussed, and we can bring it out into the open. We can talk about it much better than what we have. And as the next slide says, because we do this additional talking, the ability to reach agreement is much greater, because people have a better understanding of what's transpired. We do have, when we're trying to reach consensus, a problem of social pressure of getting people to agree to something that they really don't agree with. They think they don't have a choice, and the only way to get out of this meeting is to agree. And so that's what happens. That's why I say, if you have people leading you through consensus agreement, make sure the person is well versed about doing it. And you have to remember, if you're going to have a team decision, it's going to take longer than it's going to take with an individual. Now, this is probably correct here. I don't think you run into team think as much as you do group think. But what this really says is, whether it's team or group, it's we lose our critical capacity to evaluate what we're doing. We don't stop and think about it. I mean, all of our decisions have to be right. Anybody who criticizes us can't possibly know what we know. very, very concerning thing. We have to be very careful about this. And then this is some of the ways to avoid this. Notice at first it says the leader does not voice his opinion. A classic example of this was President Kennedy during the Cuban Missile Crisis, absenting himself from the meetings. He wanted them to come to a decision without his being there and influencing people. Bring people in from the outside. It's just another set of eyes to look at this thing and think about how you're doing it. And notice the next one, having somebody punch holes in what you're doing, devil's advocate. This is what the court jester did years ago. He used to make fun of the king or queen. Now, I use he because most all the time a court jester was a he in those days. Problem was the jester had to be careful that he didn't wind up losing his head from, poking as much fun and getting people to look through what the things that they were doing and look at them with a critical eye. But this is what you're trying to do. You're trying to be objective and saying, hey, is this the right answer? Get somebody to come in and give you some unvarnished evaluation of what it is you're trying to do. Very, very important. Brainstorming, that I've mentioned before, is a very good way to do this. Every idea is accepted. No evaluation of ideas. You keep generating idea after idea after idea after idea after the generation period has stopped. And you have written all this down in some fashion, where you do it by computer, use it writing on the pieces of paper and posting them up around the walls, which I've seen and participated in. Once that session is finished, then you can move to the evaluation process. I would suggest you would take a break, get away from that for a couple of minutes, come back, and then you start evaluating. Remember, brainstorming, no evaluation. Idea after idea after idea after idea. No evaluation. Once all the ideas are out, then you come back and evaluate. This is just a question to you. Think about how team cohesiveness and groupthink might be related. That's a possibility. Think about that. If we're too well knit together, are we going to continue to think alike and not critically evaluate? It's something that we have to think about. There's nothing wrong with disagreements. We have to learn to be able to disagree without being disagreeable. The last two we want to talk about are nominal group technique. This is where individuals are asked to respond in writing to a nominal question in writing. A lot of times that's done now on computer. You're sitting at a computer terminal and you make your answer, and the answers normally are anonymous. And then the Delphi technique, which was developed by the RAND Corporation, a think tank that does a lot of work with the government, etc. Decision making through a series of questionnaires. So we are now at 5:25, almost 5:26. And spent the last almost 55 minutes there together. So let's take a break, and we'll come back at 5:31 and get into Chapter 9, Decision Making and Creativity. Thank you. Please come back at 5:31. know what, that damn. I did hit it. Not sure where it is. Boy, if this is bad again, I will tell them what to do. I don't think that thing's on. All right, we're back, chapter 9, decision making and creativity. The sub bullet says you have to make good choices. And as we go through this session, we hope to answer these questions for you. At least I hope that we can. What's involved in the decision-making process? What are the alternative decision-making models? What are the key decision-making traps and issues? And then what can be done to stimulate creativity in decision-making? Decision-making simply boils down to selecting what you want to do. What course of action am I going to take given all the information I have and the various alternatives from which I can select? These are the steps in the decision-making process. You can see these steps on page 196 in the text. And then there's figure 9.1, which includes ethical reasoning, and we'll get into that next. The first issue is, and we talked about this already, what is it that I have to decide to do? What's the issue? What's the opportunity, etc.? Then we have to decide what courses of action we can take to solve this issue, problem, or opportunity, alternatives. We have to select one particular course of action based upon all the information that we've digested and analyzed, et cetera, we're going to set that decision into action. And then a thing here occurs about what's known as lack of participation error. That's when the people who should be participating in this decision-making process are for some reason excluded. Now, they may not have been invited. They may have made themselves absent. They knew about it and didn't want to participate, which is, I guess, making themselves absent, the same thing. But we really have to look at this thing and decide, hey, what's the issue? Why aren't these people here? And then finally, after we have done what we want to do, we've implemented what we believe is to be the best solution for the issue at hand, we have to evaluate to make sure we did whatever it is that we wanted to do. And this is giving it to you just the same way we saw before, and it's adding some other things into so we can do the things that we're required to do. This is involved in the decision-making process. Now, the next thing we have to do is we have to figure out how we get ethical reasoning, ethical deduction maybe is a better way of saying that, into our decision-making process. And you can see this and graphically displayed in figure 9.1 in the text on page 197. So what we have to do here, this talks to us about ethics. That's the philosophical study of knowing the difference between right and wrong, good character, not good character, etc. And then moral problems or moral issues is something that presents an ethical problem for the decision maker. So we can see here, if we look at the figure 9.1, which we're going to get to here in a second. This is the next thing we have to be concerned about. It's a moral dilemma. That's where we have been given two alternatives, and they can either present a ethically uncomfortable alternative. No matter which way we go, it isn't going to be ethically palatable to make this. Notice what the slide says next is that either alternative can either be beneficial or harmful. My feeling is that if you have an ethical dilemma or a moral dilemma, it probably is not going to give you an alternative that is satisfactory. It's probably going to be on the negative side. I suppose there could be an issue where it can both be beneficial, but I don't think that's going to happen. Now, here are the issues that we're going to go through, the steps that we're going to go through, and the ethical thought process of our decision-making problem. So we're not doing anything different in this particular scenario, and we're not making a new way to, or creating a new way to decide on decisions. We're still staying with the 5-step process. But now we're injecting ethics into our considerations. So we want to, as the first one says, is there an ethical dilemma? Is there something that's going to cause us equal problems, no matter what way we go? Is what we're doing good for our stakeholders? Remember, stakeholders goes beyond stockholders. Is everybody going to benefit from this? Is this an ethical decision for all of us? We want to make best ends and right means. And we'll talk about this double check down here in a second when we move to that. Making sure that, I want to read this because this is important, assure consistency of intended and taken actions. We intend to do this, and we want to make sure that once we've taken that action, it meets our intentions. And then that's exactly what it says down here when we evaluate to make sure that the intentions match the action. Now, we're going to go to the ethical double check, double checks as it says here, and we can find these on page 199. There are 4 of them: utility, rights, justice, and care. And we talk about utility. Again, we go back to the stakeholders. This is everybody. Have we considered everybody in our decision-making process? All of our stakeholders in our decision-making process. That's utility. Did we ensure that everybody's rights are respected? Have we trampled on some people's rights? Is our decision legal? Does it pass the muster of various laws or Supreme Court decisions or whatever it happens to be? And then the decision that I've made, does it show that I care about what I did and how it's going to affect other people? Now, the And next ones that we come to are what are known as the continued ethical double checks. And these are what are known as the spotlight questions. How would my family feel about this decision I'm making? They found out about it. Would they still think that I was a fine person? How would I feel, or how will I feel once I make this decision? I'd like to take that a step further, or actually 2 steps further. The first one being, after I make this decision, can I look myself in the mirror and like what I see? And the next one is, would I like to see my decision on the 11 o'clock news telecast? And then they ask a question here is, how would the person that you know that has the best moral character, best ethical conduct, how would he or she view the decision that you've made? I think that that's probably somewhat important, although I don't think, I shouldn't say somewhat important, it is important, although I don't think most people would do that. I can see if you're working with a colleague, made a decision and you know what the colleague's background, you'd ask him or her what they thought of it. But I don't know that we always have that opportunity. So I just don't know that that piece would be done. But it is something you should think about if you have that opportunity. And you're just getting somebody else's input. And there's nothing wrong with that. Getting another set of eyes and ears to look at what you've done. We now move to decision-making process itself, or types of decisions that we find. And we see here we have three kinds that are mentioned here: program, non-programmed, and then crisis. I think the best thing we can say about a program decision is we've done this before. We are now encountering, if not the same type situation, one that is very similar. And we already have gone through the process of sifting the information and making an analysis and coming to a decision process. So we've already done this. We don't need to do this again. We know how to act, and we go ahead. A non-programmed decision doesn't meet any of this. And we have to develop a specific response decision for a situation that we've never encountered before. It's completely different. So we have to craft a decision specifically for that particular type decision. Crisis decision simply says, if we don't do something very quickly, we're going to have major problems on our hand. We don't have time to do a lot of analysis, perhaps, and we need to do something post haste. We just cannot wait. Otherwise, we're liable to have our head in our hands. And I'm not talking about holding your head in your hands. We have three contexts in which to make decisions, and they kind of follow along what we've talked about before, but a little bit different. There's certainty, there's risk, and there's uncertainty. In a certain environment, we have enough information. It has been analyzed sufficiently that we can predict with certainty how each of the alternatives that we would select from will turn out before we make that decision. When we have a risky environment, we don't have the information we have. So as the slide here says, we lack that certainty, we lack that clarity. But we are aware that there are probabilities of how each alternative would turn out. So we can do that perhaps by statistical analysis if we have time, et cetera. So we get a probability. This is, if we choose this, here's the probability that our response would turn out the way we want it to do. And finally, if we have an uncertain environment, we don't have much to go on at all. We don't even have the ability to assign probabilities for each of the alternatives that we select and what their eventual outcomes might be. So we have a lot of problems here, and we have to really be careful of what we're going to do, and we have to understand that in an uncertain environment, our risk of failure of not implementing the correct decision is going to be high. One of the ways that people ameliorate these issues is by a process known as risk management. That is assigning a risk and putting that into the decision-making process. So we know what's going to happen. Now, we see this quite frequently, as you know, in the insurance industry and in some respects in the financial industry. So as the text points out, KPMG, I'm not going to try to remember what that stands for. They talk about having risks that are strategic, that fall into these categories: strategic, operational, and reputation. Strategic is a threat to our overall business. Operational is to what we're trying to do, how we're trying to get through a particular type thing, how our operations run. And then finally, reputation, that's exactly what it says. Is our good name going to be sullied by, or are we going to have to be careful about that? Are we going to have to go through some spin control, for lack of a better term, as politics likes to use it, to come to this, to make sure that we come out ahead of the game instead of being behind the power curve. Now, as the next slide will tell us, there are two types of decision models. Classical, which you see on the left, behavioral, which you see on the right, and you can find this graphically displayed in the text at figure 9.3 on page 203. Now let's look at these two and see if we can't make some kind of comparison. Well, maybe not directly, we can talk our way through and see the comparisons between these. In a classical decision-making model, the decision maker, according to this model, the model assumes that the decision maker is acting rationally because he or she has all the information necessary to make a decision. The problem is unambiguous. It doesn't have any shades of gray connected to it, if you will. It's pretty well defined. Maybe it fits in a neat little box, so we don't have to worry about that. We know all the possible alternatives and all the possible outcomes of each alternative. We're going to choose the best possible solution, and we're going to implement it. And the best solution is going to give us the biggest bang for our buck. The behavioral model says we don't have any of that. We just talk about it. Well, we don't have enough knowledge. We haven't had a chance that we can't analyze it. We don't have enough time to analyze it. So we're going to act on what we think might be the best our perception of how to do things, what we think is going to give us the best return. Well, we really don't know. We're acting without a lot of information. We just don't know what to do and where to go. So we may make what is known as a satisficing decision, which says we're going to select the first alternative. Now, not the first one we see, but the first alternative that looks like it's going to give us the best return. It's going to be acceptable, and it's going to be satisfactory, and it will resolve the problem. And notice, we've done all this without a lot of information. We've not done a lot of analysis. We're in very, very uncharted territory. Now, this particular slide says that, and we can go back to, we think about what we've just talked about, the decision-making models. There are two cognitive processes that we're going to go through here. One is systematic, as we're going to solve the problem because we can use the logical approach that we want to approach it. We got the information, we can analyze it, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas intuitive is that we're going to go on what our gut feeling is. We may do something that's very spontaneous because, in a way, it has a feel-good element to it. We think if we do this, we're going to be all right, but we really don't know, but we kind of think that. So notice that this happens when we're in these risky environments and when we're in these uncertain environments. Well, I use the term conditions, but that's okay. The next thing we use here, we talk about it, we can see this displayed here on page 205, and that's judgmental heuristics. This is using rules of thumbs and strategies or shortcuts to get where we want to get, because it's easier doing this when we're dealing with uncertainty. We have availability heuristics and representative heuristics. Now, I'm going to talk to these because I feel it's very necessary that we get this to sink into our heads, as opposed to me giving a little bit of a, well, this is how I interpret it. The availability involves assessing a current event based on past occurrences, and they're available from our memory, our computer bank. We call these up. So we're going to assess what we have that's in front of us based upon what we have back here in our memory. Whereas representativeness heuristics involves assessing the likelihood that an event will occur based on its similarity to a stereotype of one of similar occurrences. So we're talking in a way about the same thing, but a little bit differently. We're going to call our memory up and say, this current situation that's available matches this one, and so we're going to go ahead. Whereas this one is, we're talking about the likelihood that an event will occur based on a similarity to a stereotype that we talked about, that we have in our memory bank. Anchoring in adjustment heuristics involves assessing an event by taking initial value from historical precedent or an outside source and then incrementally adjusting the value to make a current assessment. Here is what is listed in the text. Existing base salary becomes an anchor and then we increase salaries till we get to where we want to get. But we really don't know that that base is correct. So that's something that we do, this anchoring. We set something as an anchor would do. It's grounded, it holds, and then we incrementally increase where we're going. Well, here we have some things we have to be careful about. These are the traps that we fall into in making decisions. We have confirmation bias. This just means that we're only going to take what we have and make adjustments to that. We're only going to seek things that support what we already thought about. So we already made up our mind, and we're only going to let in the information that supports the decision we have already made without examining the facts. Hindsight error, we could have predicted this. And we fall into a trap here because the event's already taken place, and we say, oh, well, we could have predicted that. Hindsight, is a perfect science. We're not looking forward, we're looking back at what happened. And in the framing error, tendency to evaluate and resolve the problem in the context in which it's perceived, which may or may not be right. So go back to that scenario that I talked about before. The car dealer is told that sales are down. And the first person comes to him and says, well, we're in a bad location. So he says, okay, well, let's go out here and find a new location. We'll move there and our sales will increase. Yeah, that may be right, but it may be 100% wrong. Without doing some fact checking, he's certainly not going to know. Now, again, we've talked about this in the past. And these are things that we need to think about, these traps and these issues. And we need to stop and think about what it is that we're talking about here. What matters? If I try to solve this problem, will it make a difference? What happens if I don't do anything? Will it resolve itself? Is it worth my effort? Down here to the next thing. Is this my monkey to fix, correct? Or does it belong to somebody else? Don't take on a problem that doesn't belong to you. Put it back where it belongs. Now, somebody comes and asks you for help, that's something entirely different. We're talking about, is this my problem? And we don't want to be concerned about that. We don't want to be concerned about saying, we don't want to be concerned about saying, hey, this is the problem. Problem doesn't belong to me. And
you are the first caller and will be placed on hold until the next caller arrives.
If I'm going to spend time on this, is my time going to be well worth it? Am I going to get a return for what I've decided to do? Authority decision, we've already talked about this before. I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on this. It's something that's there, and it's not going to be an issue. This person in charge is going to decide on it, and we go from there. Consultative decision is just the reverse. The manager gets the appropriate people together and they make the decision. So he gets all the information he or she needs before making the decision by getting input from the various team members. Boy, did I screw up tonight. And this is a team decision. This is when team members get together, work together, and make the final choice. Now, this next slide I'm going to show you, I am not going to spend a lot of time on. This is the Vroom-Yago decision-making model, and it's not something that you have to be concerned about. It's a very busy slide, very busy figure in your textbook, and you can look at this. It could give you some ideas and some suggestions, but it's not something that you have to be concerned about. Here's another trap: escalating commitment. This means we continue doing things just because. We're pretty well convinced that what we've done isn't working and is not going to work, but we're going to continue it anyway. For what reason? For what purpose? We need to be careful about this. There's an old saying: you have to decide whether it's time to continue fishing or to cut bait. And it's something that really is very, very important, and you need to pay attention to that. Make sure that you need to find out, if you continue with this action, whether the dividends are going to be repaid, whether you're going to have a plus or a minus in doing what you're doing. Obviously then look at what it costs to consider doing this and whether or not it's worth continuing. Creativity is exactly what it says. That's coming up with a novel idea, a new way of doing things, perhaps new approaches. We'll find that in many cases, creativity is not only new, but it can be, on the other way, taking something that exists, and instead of creating something brand new from that, figuring out how to improve what's already being done, either new processes or making things work better or something of that nature. Now, this particular slide, figure 9.5, which you can see on page 212, is the difference between individual creativity drivers and team creativity drivers. And some of this sort of boils over into each one: task expertise. Obviously, you have to have that with a team. Creativity, task motivation, so they all belong down here, but they all belong down at the bottom as well. But what we have here is creative membership as opposed to creativity of an individual. And we also have external support, which you probably will have as an individual, but it seems like it works better when it's with the team. Something that you want to consider, making sure that you're doing things the way you want to do them. And this just goes back to personal creativity drivers that we just talked about. The next slide will tell us about team creativity drivers. And notice there's some things down here. Some techniques to make teams better is doing things cross-pollination, associative play, etc. cross-pollination just means trying to get people to take on other tasks and become more responsible to other tasks, etc. And then this last slide is, in your experience, this is an interesting site with simulations and training on creative techniques and ways to enhance your own individual creativity, brainstorming.co.uk. And a little early tonight, this is a relatively short chapter, brings us to the end of chapter 9, decision making and creativity. So next week we will return with chapter 10, which is conflict and negotiation, and then chapter 11 is communication, which is always an interesting chapter for all of us. I thank you for your attention and good night. Oh, man.